Hey everybody, welcome back or welcome to our AIM Lab Spotlight, where we highlight some of the brightest coaches, players, and experts to improve your gaming performance. With us today is Summer Scott, who is the head of player development at CounterLogic Gaming. For the past 5 years, she's focused on helping esport athletes reach peak performance using holistic training approaches. In this episode, we discuss goal setting, teamwork strategies, and developing variation in training. We hope you enjoy. Hey Summer, it's great to have you on.
Nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about this conversation, and we're going to talk about two different aspects of player development and performance. First, the player side, but then also the coaching side. And so first, I want to just ask about what are some of the ways that players can learn to be more effective and efficient in developing their overall performance?
Gotcha. Yeah. The main things that I encourage the players I work with to focus on is going to be goal setting and deliberate practice. When you're thinking about goal setting, a lot of times people think about the result goal side of things, like, for my CLG Red team, it's going to be, we want to promote out of our advanced league into MDL, right? Or I just want to have this amount of win rate. And those things are kind of very difficult to focus on. They're very driving, and for people like me who are kind of perfectionistic and achievement oriented, they really do satisfy that urge to lean forward and have forward momentum, which is great. However, it does not actually provide you a lot of control over the situation, which can be really troublesome and demotivating over time. So what you should be aiming to do instead is trying to take that overarching goal and break it down into smaller, more meaningful ones that you do have control over. And this could be how you set up a timeline. For instance, say I have a goal that I want to hit in 1 year. Well, that's 365 days that you need to somehow get control over, right? So you're going to break that down into maybe 3-month segments. Ask yourself, if I can do something every 3 months, what is that thing that I could accomplish? And then you break it down from there. Okay, so in the next 3 months, what can I do once a month that I can hit and have said I'm moving closer? Every 3 weeks. Okay, over the next 3 weeks, where am I at? And then over the next 3 days, what am I doing? And then once you get down to the 3-day marker, that's when you're getting down to the brass tacks and saying, realistically, what am I going to be focusing on? Do I want to be able to maintain this average amount of kills in every single game that I have? Do I want to have a feel of clean movement in this particular way? How can I achieve that? Or I want to be able to achieve a certain level of accuracy using some sort of aim trainer, maybe, that would allow you to kind of actually benchmark yourself and show progress over time. So that's kind of the main way that you can kind of narrow down those very result oriented goals down to process oriented ones that give you a lot more control over the outcome of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I mean, because that's a great framework to then kind of reverse engineer what that roadmap looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like the processes are also, it's like, what are the behaviors needed to achieve that outcome? And I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes players kind of set these lofty goals, which is great. I'm not against that. But then they don't really think through what is the process to get there. And they think forward versus thinking backwards. And I think
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, working backwards is always a more methodical way because you can kind of deconstruct the different layers of what needs to be true to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, I mean, I've actually never thought of it in terms of like a 3-year or a 3-month or 3-day. I've typically gone someday goal, a 5-year, 1 year, 1 month, or 6-month, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day. But I like the 3-day, like the threes in that,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that gives you enough time and space to kind of work and really kind of layer that on and move things forward.
Yeah. And the one thing I really want to focus on in this framework is, notice I said it's the thing that I do every 3 months that's going to lead to the success. And that really points to the main crux of the issue, which is it's about consistency.
Right.
It's not just about whether or not you were able to hit that once. It's about whether or not you were able to build up the habits all along to make that a consistent thing. It's just a part of you at that point. It's not something that you happened upon because the day was good or the circumstances were right.
Right.
So that's really the end goal. These should be behaviors that you're building upon always. I should be able to say, well, if my aim is at 69% accuracy today. I want it to be 72 tomorrow. 3 weeks from now, I want it to be holding, pushing up, getting up to closer to 75, right? Like it's constantly moving, but always the same thing that I'm working on, right?
Right.
Finding these very stable measures and making sure that you are chipping away at them, improving them slowly and slowly, and building that skill foundation.
Yeah. So it's really having that good foundational understanding of first your baseline of where you're at and taking stock of that, and then saying, okay, well, what are the areas that I want to improve? And then building out those processes to continue to like check, recheck, and like course correct as you're moving down that road.
Yep, you got it.
And so then
It's
what
that
do you,
simple.
yeah, right. It's simple, but yet it's hard at times, right?
Yeah, it
Because it
is.
becomes sometimes if you don't break it into those smaller chunks, it's kind of becomes this really lofty, like big, hairy, audacious goal. And you're like, I have no idea how I'm going to do that. And that
Mhm.
may even, invoke some sort of fear. And it's hard for people to then take those steps that are really necessary to accomplish that because they just see it as such a large goal.
Yeah. I mean, also, the grind of it all can really become overwhelming. Like even when you're in the thick of it, it's just like, oh, I'm going to be doing this thing again today. And part of what makes it fun and dynamic is when you find new ways to challenge yourself, and new ways to tackle that same goal. So that's also why I'm just like, yes, you want to build consistency, but you also want to build in a lot of like creativity and innovation into the way that you practice, because like everybody gets bored after a while. So you kind of have to know that about yourself. You don't have to look downly at yourself being like, hey, I just like lack discipline or something like that. It has nothing to do with your discipline. Like people get bored when they do the same thing. So when you kind of look at these small chunks of time, you can also build a lot of variation into your training that makes it fun and enjoyable and something that feels worthwhile as you're going after it.
I think variation is key. And I think that it needs to be adopted more and more frequently into practice and training so that you also avoid burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can create a program where you're not doing the same thing every single day, the chances are you're going to have more of that variation, allow yourself a little bit of that rest in between some of those more taxing days and maybe less taxing days. And then also different emphasis on what you're really trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And like the goal can be a little bit different as well.
Right.
Um, Sometimes you may fall into more of a routine when you're just trying to maintain things though, but if you're actually trying to improve things, it's very important that you have this dynamic approach, because you want the days where you can just like push yourself absolutely to the limit and then have that nice rest and recovery. If you're doing the grind every day, you're actually not going to have the energy to sustain that kind of like pump and push in performance. So sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not, right? If you're in the maintenance phase, then it's a little bit more routine. But if you're trying to seek performance for a specific thing and seek out gains, then that's when you're really going to lean into the more dynamic approach.
Right. Definitely. And so what do you think are some of the things that are overlooked by players in their development right now?
So, like speaking of this grind, there is a slow build of physical and mental injury that tends to be overlooked, and it really creeps up on you. It's just one of those things that it is very easy to give inattention to your physical and mental health over time. But when it finally comes to a head, when it's finally a problem, it's something that took 6 months to create, and you betcha it's going to take a long time for you to undo. So, and this could be for the physical side, repetitive stress injuries, a very common thing is just like eye fatigue, right? Like once your eyes are kind of worn out, now you have a problem. Now you got to get your glasses fixed and you have like all these to-do list items. And to not even be able to look at a screen at the end of the day when all you want to do is improve, like it's really important. So maintaining just like simple eye care is really on there. And of course, we're worried about issues with like carpal tunnel and things of that nature. And generally speaking, when your mind and body are telling you, hey, man, this is starting not to feel good, you kind of need to learn to listen to that and find balance.
Right.
And it's not to say that you need to cease learning, but back to this idea of variation, you need to alter your approach. Maybe you can't grind out the games for that day, but you can switch over to maybe watching some YouTube VODs, learning something a little bit different where you're not having to physically move the mouse and keyboard in order to be pushing yourself. Um, so that's kind of like the main things that I try to encourage people to balance out. And on the mental side, it could also be attention to building mastery in things that are not gaming. so that when gaming isn't working, you still have a really strong sense of self elsewhere.
Right.
Um, so that can be, learning another skill, focusing on cultivating strong relationships in your support system. Like you're always going to need somebody to give you a high five. Like don't convince yourself you don't need high fives, right? And those are things that you can really put attention elsewhere, even for just like 20 minutes a day, that make a big difference over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think kind of what you're pointing at too is along the same lines of like teamwork and communication. So not only are you working on your personal skills outside, but then also inside the game as well, and building those strong bonds with your teammates so that when you are feeling a bit fatigued, you can have that good communication and kind of pick up the slack of the unit as a whole, and then work together collectively to either modify if you need to on that day, or just kind of have that knowing of like, hey, today might be a little bit of an off day. Maybe we can modify a little bit if we need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my favorite part of watching uh, the athletes play at CLG is that everybody has an overwhelming sense of not wanting to be the weak link. Even when they're on their worst day, they just don't want to let their team down. They want to fight for the guy next to them. And the only way that you can really have that, which is a benefit to you, right, as the player, to be able to look beyond yourself and focus on the team to motivate you. Um, the only way that you can really have that is by maintaining strong respect and bonds with the people next to you. If you don't really care about the person next to you, how they're doing, their progress and their goals, then you're just going to lose out on that extra piece of motivation that can really help push you over the finish line. So you lose out yourself and in your own potential when you fail to cultivate these kinds of relationships.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about like team dynamics. So what do
Mhm.
you find are the best ways to really foster good team dynamics, both in game and out of game?
I focus a lot of attention on helping others learn to listen, and learn to offer what a teammate needs rather than what feels good for you.
Mm.
Um, Oftentimes, especially in games where it's very feedback centric in terms of the improvement, right? You get into the game, you get out of it, and you figure out what went wrong, talk about it as a team, and then hop into the next one to see if you can do corrective action. That's like basic process of how a team operates in esport. um, Oftentimes I'll see players coming into that post game phase with a lot of frustrations from the game prior, looking for kind of someone to blame. And it's not necessarily an intentional thing, and it's not even a direct thing, but it's in the flavor of the feedback that's given. It's very much of, this is what you need to do for me, rather than like a, hey, this is something that you can do that allows us to blah. And that's kind of the main shift that you hope that a player would make, because it's the hallmark of a healthy team. It means that you're actually listening to what's going on, you're understanding why mistakes are happening for the other person, not what you expect of them and not what you think should be happening. I often say, like, don't shit all over your teammates, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
not
exactly. Yeah. I love
cool.
that phrase. Yeah.
um and just kind of like leaning into that aspect, being like, how can we be better, is kind of the main game. So Tony Alessandro is actually somebody that inspired me with that. He has the platinum rule when he's just like, there's the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have done unto yourself, which is what a lot of people operate under. But he encouraged you to say, do unto others as they would have done to them, understanding what they like, how they like to be spoken to, and what resonates with them, and delivering it that way.
Yeah, I like that. And I think also kind of tying into the listening is being able to reflect back as somebody's sharing something with you, being able to reflect back to them so that you can kind of get in their world and they get that sense too, because everybody wants to be heard, seen, and understood.
Yep.
And so I think part of the team dynamics is being able to relay that information back and forth. And then, like you said, give them the information that's relevant for the collective, not what's going to make you feel better, but really what's
Mm-hmm.
going to help the team as a whole. And then if there needs to be a side conversation outside of that context, that can happen as well.
Mm-hmm. I will also say that it's not to say that if you have frustrations with a teammate that you should just hold it in all day, and just like let it fester, right? Because that just builds resentment over time. I want to emphasize the fact that there is a time and a place. If really your feelings are the problem, there's a way to address that. However, it's addressing the feeling, right? It's, what you're doing is making me feel this way because I think it means this. So in the future, I need you to do this. so that we can all be better and I can not have to feel this way, right? But that conversation is all about how what you're doing is making me feel. And it can be as simple as like, I feel really helpless because you're struggling with this aspect and I don't know how to help you change. And I fear that we're all going to fail if we can't figure out a way for you to be better. And those are very healthy conversations to have.
Yeah.
Additionally, like just simple processing conversations where it's just like, you know what, this is the most effective way you can talk to me. If you raise your voice to me, if you use this kind of language, I just immediately shut down. I wish I could do better, but it's just not me. So please, like when you're talking to me, offer me feedback this way. Like those conversations go a really long way. Because if you're not getting what you want, it may be because it's just an ineffective conversation overall, and it was never going to work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you're really pointing to is just having mature conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And that in of itself can be a growth process, and kind of leaning into that discomfort of really sharing what's going on for you in the context of the team environment and being vulnerable in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when the real leaders start to emerge, is when you're able to be vulnerable and really share what's going on for you and have it land for the other members of the team, and also honor and be authentic in yourself, because then other people are going to see that and reflect it back to you. I think that's what really builds the strong relationships and successful teams.
Yeah. And also the most difficult part of this is going to be the self-awareness. Not
Yes.
everybody realizes that, you're just kind of in the heat of the moment and you just end up yelling, right? But you don't always have the presence of mind to be like, oh, I'm angry right now.
Yeah.
And this is why. And like a lot of times there's like this secondary emotion underneath that we're really afraid to own up to, like what you just said hurt me. I have to now admit that you hurt me and I'm hurt, which to a lot of people feels weak. But I think it's probably one of the most strong things that you can do is to say, hey, I'm going to stand up in front of you with no armor and let you take a shot if you feel like it. But I'm going to trust that you're not, because this is what courage looks like.
Yep.
And this is what it takes to win. So kind of leaning into that, understanding yourself, building that self-awareness and owning up to the real things that are going on is the first step to being able to do this stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And so that's in the team context. I'm curious if you could share a story of maybe like an in-game lesson that was learned from working with one of the players that maybe went through some adversity and really had some challenges in game that you were able to kind of help them work through. And then what did that kind of look like, and what did they use, and what did they do moving forward?
One of my favorite players to have ever worked with, it was a League of Legends player. He really struggled getting through an early game that didn't go as expected. Something would go wrong in his lane, and it was a top laner. So this was somebody who, as it is, requires a lot of communication and understanding of what's happening without being able to see, right? It's a very communication based, and being able to listen and then provide input and show up when needed. So he would often kind of just like give up because he just couldn't find the way. And after kind of really talking to him and exploring that deeper, we kind of learned that it came down to just being really afraid of failure, afraid of playing out a game, trying every possible thing that you could to pull it out, and then still end up failing. So as a result, rather than putting himself in that vulnerable position, he would just kind of self-sabotage and just kind of mentally AFK from the game and do things that would cease to coordinate or communicate with his team anymore. Once we identified that was the core, and that it was just a fear of his, and learning how to lean into trying your absolute best, even though you're kind of uncertain of what the outcome could be, it was really releasing for him, and he was able to start trying new things, and having a more positive outlook on how he can improve even when the result didn't come out the way he wanted. So that was really a really kind of triumphant moment, at least for him as a player and for me as a coach.
Awesome. There's so much good stuff in there, and that applies not only to MOBAs, but FPS. All genres of games, or all teamwork, or individuals that are trying to perform at a high level that may be working within the context of a team, is we all have some underlying fears in some way, or some sort of coping mechanisms that may show up. And I think once you can notice and name and identify what that is and really get underneath it, it's very freeing. And it frees you up to be, more courageous and more creative to find solutions. But you have to get to that point first. And this kind of points back to, just the internal noticing and being able to kind of check in with yourself and identify like, hey, like what's really going on for me in this moment. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the more that you practice that, the better you become at being able to pick up on those cues, those internal cues, much more quickly. And then you're able to then figure that out and then continue to move forward.
Mm-hmm. I often call upon the classic trope of like religious movies, like The Exorcist and all that jazz. Um, and I kind of call this exercise Name the Demon. You'll notice that in that trope, pretty much anytime you have some kind of possession, right, of some outside force dictating someone's behavior that you have no control over, it's very anxiety provoking for the person. And it all comes from an uncertainty of why this behavior is coming out. What is keeping me from having the life that I want
Right.
and going after what I want? It's this complete loss of control. And in those movies, you'll see that the crux of the issue always comes down to putting a name on this force inside you. And it could be a emotional force, it could be a fear of some sort, right? But once you are able to name the emotion, name the thing that is driving you away from what you want and your values, you then can take control. And it's such a powerful metaphor. I draw back to it all the time, and you can visualize yourself and almost talk to that fear inside and that emotional state as if they were this like outer body demon that you're wishing to kind of exercise.
Yeah. This reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Peter Crone. And he says that people and circumstances, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal the ways in which you're not free. And so when you're in these moments and something happens, whether it's with somebody or in the context of a game, and that triggers something inside of you, that's a moment for you to realize, like, okay, where am I not free? Like, where am I not able to operate free of whatever's holding me back to really navigate this the best way that I can?
Mm-hmm.
And I love the whole exorcism. I mean, that's like, it's so true, because once you're able to put your finger on it, you can really call it out and get underneath it and let that go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, for sure.
Awesome. So kind of transitioning now into more of like the coaching dynamic, so let's kind of stay on the team dynamics for a second, but from the coach's perspective, what does that look like? And I know you work a lot with coaches, when you're working with coaches to try to help them build team dynamics, what are some of the things you touch on?
I often will go in and say, hey man, where are you struggling? What are the problems that you really feel like you can't solve? And it usually is some sort of unruly player where they just can't understand that person's behavior in any way, shape, or form. It's very disruptive. And it's not just disruptive to the team environment, but it's disruptive to the coach. The coach feels disempowered as a result of some of the behavior that he's seeing with another person. So oftentimes I will kind of deconstruct why that's happening and what it is interfering with for the coach specifically. Where does that person feel inept or with a lack of skill? And from there, we can start thinking about, okay, well, why is this? What makes you tick as a person? What is your authentic voice as a coach? What culture did you feel like you'd want to exist in and could thrive in? And then from there, we can build out a team culture and expectations of behavior from each individual person that you can hold them accountable to, that not only can provide structure and framework for the players, but it allows the coach to be themselves and not have to force their will into a situation. It's a very empowering moment for them because they realize that they can control the environment and thusly make players engage with them in ways that are allowing the coach to bring their best to the table.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, coming from traditional sports and being a part of many different cultures and the programs that I've worked at, and then now being in esports and being a part of some different cultures in that. I mean, I think really identifying the type of culture that you want to build and then embodying that, because that really sets the psychology and how everybody operates within that framework. So you're really shaping the environment. And so I love that you really, have them kind of point to what is authentic to them. So it's not them maybe feeling like an imposter in some ways of trying to act or feel a certain way when really they want to go a completely different direction. Because then that limits them. I would imagine that limits them a lot in how they want to operate and how they want their coaching style. And then also the players pick up on that too. Because I've always said the players go as you go. So if you're not showing up in an authentic way, the players are smart. They're going to pick up on that. And then there's not going to be like this this resonance between the coaching staff and the players.
For sure. Um, and it takes a lot of courage to do this, to think of all of this stuff from scratch, because oftentimes advice you hear is, well, if you want to be successful, you should find somebody that's successful and try to emulate what they do, which is not altogether bad advice, but you don't actually know why it works so well for that person. I often see coaches come in with a very authoritarian style because they just believe that that is what a coach is. Um, I personally remember having a conversation about my own leadership, and we were talking about what a leader means. And I was just like, oh, I don't really see myself as a leader. And like I was pulled aside and just like, why on earth would you say that? Like, what? You're clearly a leader. And I'm just like, because in my brain, I'm just like, this is somebody who stands over people, bosses them around, tells them what to do, and has this like air about them that's like really intense. And I'm just like, that's not me, man. I'm really chill vibes. I just want people to be happy, feel heard, listened to, and empowered. Right. And I didn't feel like that actually fit as a leader. And I had to be, woken up to the fact that no, like me, my authentic voice and me showing up is leadership. So.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that it's just you being authentic and being a stand for how you want to show up and how you want to navigate the world, and people will gravitate towards that. Mm-hmm. So how does this, and I know you're really a big fan of the positive coaching, so can you talk a little bit about that and how this kind of conversation feeds into that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of bridge in from the leadership aspect of things, where I believe that every coach is a conduit of change, that you invoke a certain kind of energy, the most true energy of yourself, and by nature of people being around you, it creates the change. And that way you are the conduit of change. And to kind of break that down a little bit more, for me, I really lean into positive coaching. I believe in coaching in a way that encourages positive character development and really involves a lot of social and emotional growth in parallel with skill development in game. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that you have to do that. There's like no other way, especially in a team focused game. Like, you cannot ignore the human aspect of things. Like, I would love it if we can just guarantee results because we're working with all robots, but this is not perfecting AI. So you just kind of have to be improving yourself as a human in order to seek performance gains overall. So that's kind of how I view positive coaching. And then practically speaking, really comes down to focusing a lot on what's going right in a team and reinforcing the constructive behaviors rather than being very shame and mistake driven, which I see a lot. I see a ton of. It might be because you're kind of used to like a more authoritarian parent at home where you're used to being scolded for stuff. But to be a good coach in my eyes, you have to get beyond that mindset and start focusing on positive things. Additionally, when mistakes happen, the immediate focus is going to be, okay, so in the future, how can we get this right? How can we play this better? How can we avoid these situations altogether, right? And then finally, it's just kind of keeping the overall environment very light and encouraging. And for people who are very competitive, this seems counterintuitive, but at least in my line of work, most of my most competitive players naturally are going to be focused on improving themselves, putting pressure on themselves. They have that drive to achieve and improve. That's coming internally. I don't need to do that.
Right.
But like there's a kind of flip side to that. If that energy goes out of hand, it can be extremely destructive and tear somebody down. So that's why, as the coach, your job is to counterbalance that and make sure that the environment is very fostering and encouraging so that you are kind of like using both sides of the coin to create forward momentum.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you called out the balancing act. I mean, because really it's the art and science of coaching. It's being able to read the room, read the players, pick up on body language, and know when to push and when to pull back. And everybody's different. So there's always this constant flux of this ebb and flow of the room with the different personalities, the different upbringings, the different whatever happened that day. And I mean, that's like one of the things I love most about coaching is being able to be in that environment. And it's like a puzzle. right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out a puzzle each and every day of, what's going to continue to work towards those goals, but really listening and drilling down on, okay, like what needs to be said or what needs to be done in this moment to help kind of shape and balance and counterbalance.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and there, I know definitely like in everything that you said, there's some points that you could probably pull out. Like maybe what are some of the things that coaches are overlooking that you can
Mm-hmm.
maybe pull out and kind of just touch on a little bit?
Um, the biggest aspect of this is I want to encourage coaches not to what I kind of refer to as the Jenga approach of coaching. And this is where you kind of read the meta of the game and you're kind of saying, oh, this is what needs to be there. So you kind of pull from the bottom and place things on top without necessarily having attention to what the foundation of what made that player very strong to begin with. So kind of having that haphazard approach, mistake driven approach can be really dangerous because while you can be pushing to great heights, it's unstable. You will find that you may have crafted a player that can succeed very well in one meta, but with a small shift that completely crumbles. So I really want coaches to be able to have a stronger understanding of building foundations and being smart about building off a player's strengths rather than what you think is strong for the game. The game will simply change too much, and you're not going to be able to have somebody with a high level of expertise when they're constantly trying to shift their strategy in terms of skill development.
Yeah, definitely. So now circling back to the players to kind of come full circle, what would be some advice you'd want to give to young players that are coming up? Maybe they're an aspiring pro, maybe they've just become pro. What would be some of that key advice you'd want to give them?
I would say, A, use gaming as a way to propel you into life. I find that oftentimes players will be signed and it's almost like they're in a holding period where it's just like, this is the thing I fell into. I could have gone to college, I could have done XYZ, but I'm going to do gaming because it sounds fun. Um, and I would hate for someone to spend 3, 4, 5 years or more having a career and then leaving it having earned nothing really in terms of building life and like in getting themselves into culture of the world and setting themselves up for success in their life. So that's the main thing. You need to be using this opportunity, especially because you enjoy it, to position yourself positively for more and more opportunities, diverse opportunities moving forward. So that's kind of like the first piece of advice. The next piece of advice is you should be constantly building a portfolio of your strengths, skills, and assets. You should have a very strong understanding of who you are and what makes you great in game and out of game. Um, and it doesn't really matter if it applies directly to the game right now. This is stuff that's fantastic when you're just on any interview in life where it's just like, hey, man, this is why I'm awesome. This is my brand of leadership. I know that because I played, Fortnite for so long. And of course, that someone's going to look at you and they're like, Fortnite. And you're like, let me drop some knowledge for you, right? Um, so that's kind of like how that applies. And when you're thinking about strengths, skills, and asset, your strengths are going to be the things that are character traits and behaviors that you execute on very consistently that provide positive or unique value to a team. This is a little bit different from a skill because this is a particular ability or area of expertise, right? This is something that is built over time. So example, your aim or having efficient movements is going to be something that you just don't wake up with. This is something that you invest a lot of effort into and build over time. Same thing with your knowledge base. This is something that you don't wake up with. It's not just something that just falls into you because you played a lot. It's because you spent a lot of time thinking about the game, understanding its mechanics, things of that nature. So your knowledge set can also fall into the skill category. Finally, your assets are just circumstantial things that happen to be great and can be leveraged. So something simple is like having a consistent work or school life. A consistent work or school life is actually pretty good because it allows you to build in a schedule that's more concrete and allows you to have a lot of control over your skill development in gaming. So that's just something that happens to be there and that you can leverage. So that's kind of how I would think about those things. And then the final thing is working on your weaknesses that unharness the potential of your strengths. First, focusing on what makes you great and saying, hey, I'm slightly limited or held back in this strength here, and that allows me to push further. So say I'm a Counter-Strike player and I want to be a really great anchor. Great anchors are aggressive, they have strong aim, and they have very fast reactions. They also have really strong decision making. So say you had the first three, but not the last, then you know, hey, I got all these other things working for me. I just need to work on that decision making and refine it so that I can really unharness everything there is about being an anchor. So that's kind of how I would work on those things. Those 3 tips will take you a long way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that. It's been great having you on. Really respect everything that you're doing and love the work that you're putting out. Do you have any shout outs, social media links, upcoming events, anything you want to point to?
I really, really love answering questions, interacting with everybody. A lot of times when people contact me, it challenges me to think about things in new ways and help new people that I wouldn't ordinarily have access to. So I'm always open to hearing from people at my Twitter. It's at PsychSummer, PsychSummer. Yeah, just hit me up, tweet there, DM me. We'll get some stuff done.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, we hope you enjoyed that episode with Summer. We covered a lot of great topics that you can integrate into your daily routine. If you dig these videos, like it, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media, where we are constantly putting out great content to help you level up your gaming. See you next time.